At 19 years old, Evan Carter had learned something most people never noticed. Airplanes had voices. Not the pilots, not the radios, the machines themselves. Every engine spoke through vibration, pitch, and rhythm. A healthy jet didn't just make noise, it sang. Evan had spent thousands of hours listening while others walked past, unaware. That morning at Falcon Ridge International Airport, the sky was clean and blue, perfect flying weather, the kind that made people trust machines too easily. Flight 732 sat at the far end of Runway 4, a wide-body jet packed with 418 passengers, families heading on vacation, business travelers half asleep, a few nervous first-time flyers gripping armrests. Inside the cockpit, all lights were green. Outside, Evan knelt beside a maintenance cart, signing off paperwork from an overnight inspection. His oil-stained gloves were tucked into his back pocket. He was tired, but alert. Then the plane began to move. The wheels rolled. Evan looked up instinctively and froze. Something was wrong. The jet accelerated down the runway, but the sound was empty. No rising thunder, no deep vibration in the ground beneath his boots. Just air rushing past metal. Evan's stomach tightened. That's not right. He had heard this sound before, only once, in a simulator failure drill. A rare scenario instructors talked about like a ghost story. False power indication. The cockpit could think the engines were producing thrust, while they were barely alive. Evan stood up slowly, eyes locked on the aircraft. The nose was still down, speed increasing, but the engines weren't pushing the way they should. He saw a brief shimmer near the right engine, like heat that shouldn't be there. Then a flicker. A flash of flame, gone as fast as it appeared. Evan's heart slammed against his ribs. He dropped the clipboard and grabbed his radio. "Ground control, this is Mechanic Carter," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm observing abnormal engine output on Flight 732. Recommend immediate abort." Static crackled. Then a voice replied, calm, dismissive. "Copy that, Carter. Systems show normal. Stand clear." Evan swallowed hard. "They're trusting the screens." He pressed the button again. "Sir, with respect, engine sound and exhaust pattern are inconsistent. Thrust isn't building." A pause. Then a different voice came on, irritated. "You're a trainee, right?" "Yes, sir." "Then clear the runway area. The aircraft is committed." Committed. That word hit him like a punch. The plane was already past the halfway point. At this speed, the pilots were seconds away from V1, the point of no return. Evan's legs moved before his mind caught up. He started running. Security shouted from behind him, "Hey, get back!" But Evan's eyes were locked on the cockpit windows. Inside that plane were 418 people who had no idea their engines were lying to them. He ran faster. The jet roared closer, but the roar was wrong, too thin, too hollow. Evan waved his arms wildly, stepping closer to the centerline. He knew the risk. One wrong move and he'd be erased. But fear didn't stop him. Fear focused him. "If they lift, they won't climb." His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Engines don't fail politely, Evan. They fail when you trust them too much." The nose of the aircraft began to rise slightly. Evan screamed, though no one could hear him. Inside the cockpit, Captain Mark Havel frowned. "Engine pressure feels sluggish," the first officer said. "Indications are fine," Havel replied, but his eyes narrowed. Then he saw something on the runway. A person, dead ahead. "What the—" The first officer's breath caught. "Abort, abort!" Havel didn't hesitate. He slammed the throttles back and hit the brakes. The jet shuddered violently. Passengers were thrown forward as seatbelts locked. Overhead, bins rattled. A shrill alarm filled the cockpit. Tires screamed in protest. Smoke poured from the wheels. Evan dove to the side as the aircraft thundered past him, so close he felt the heat from the fuselage. The plane stopped just short of the runway end. Silence followed. For a moment, the entire airport held its breath. Then sirens erupted. Fire trucks raced forward. Security tackled Evan to the ground. "What were you thinking?" someone shouted. Evan didn't answer. He was staring at the engines. One was leaking fuel. The other was coughing, barely alive. Inside the cabin, passengers sat frozen, confused, terrified, alive. In the cockpit, Captain Havel removed his headset slowly. "That kid," he said quietly. "He wasn't wrong." Outside, Evan was pulled to his feet. His hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from delayed shock. An airport supervisor stormed toward him. "You ran onto an active runway," the man yelled. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Evan met his eyes. "Yes, sir," he said softly. "I stopped a plane that couldn't fly." Behind them, engineers opened the engine panels. And what they were about to find would change everything. The runway smelled of burned rubber and fear. Smoke drifted slowly into the morning air as fire crews surrounded Flight 732. Passengers remained seated, silent now, listening to instructions with trembling hands. Some were crying. Others stared forward, unable to understand how close they had come to dying. Evan Carter stood near a service truck, wrapped in a reflective safety blanket. His knees felt weak, and his ears rang from the scream of brakes and sirens. Only minutes earlier, he had been certain he might not survive the next few seconds. Now everyone else had. Airport security kept a careful distance, unsure whether Evan was reckless or something else entirely. Inside the cockpit, Captain Mark Havel sat perfectly still, replaying the moment again and again. The engine instruments had looked fine, green across the board. But his instincts, sharpened by decades of flying, had felt the hesitation. And then he'd seen the boy on the runway. A boy who was right. "Captain," the first officer said quietly, "maintenance wants us to shut down both engines completely." "Do it," Havel replied, "and nobody powers anything back up." When technicians opened the right engine cowling, the smell of raw fuel hit them instantly. One of them froze. "Get engineering here, now!" Within minutes, senior inspectors arrived. They traced the fuel line carefully, following the path from tank to combustion chamber. What they found made the room fall silent. A hairline fracture in the primary fuel manifold. Invisible to normal inspection, undetectable by standard sensors. Under high-speed load, the line vibrated, cutting fuel flow just enough to starve the engine while still feeding the indicators false data. The second engine wasn't better. A manufacturing defect in a shared fuel pressure regulator meant that when one engine faltered, the other followed. Together they created a nightmare scenario. False takeoff power, no climb capability, no recovery. An engineer swallowed hard. If this aircraft had rotated... He didn't finish the sentence. Outside, Evan watched investigators move with sudden urgency. Radios crackled with words he couldn't hear, but he could read the tension in their body language. He knew. An airport executive approached, flanked by two senior safety officials. "Evan Carter?" the man asked. "Yes, sir." "You're aware you violated multiple safety protocols?" Evan nodded. "I am." The executive studied him carefully. "Why did you do it?" Evan took a breath. "Because engines talk, sir, and those engines were whispering when they should have been shouting." For a long moment no one spoke. Then the executive said quietly, "You may have saved 418 lives." The words didn't feel real. Evan's throat tightened. Inside the terminal, passengers were finally escorted off the aircraft. As they walked through the jet bridge, they saw the damage, burn marks, leaking fuel, mechanics working urgently. Fear turned into understanding. Whispers spread. A mechanic stopped the plane. "Just a kid." He ran onto the runway. One by one, passengers began asking the same question. "Where is he?" Captain Havel found Evan near the hangar, sitting alone on a crate. "I owe you my crew," Havel said, extending his hand, "and every soul on that plane." Evan shook it, still stunned. "I just listened," he replied. Havel smiled grimly. "Most people don't." The investigation lasted 12 hours. By sunset, the findings were clear and terrifying. The failure had occurred before, twice, at other airports. In both cases, the planes had aborted for unrelated reasons. The defect had gone unnoticed. Until now. A fleet-wide grounding was ordered. Airlines across the country received emergency bulletins because of a 19-year-old mechanic. That evening, the airport director called an unscheduled gathering in the terminal's main hall. Passengers from Flight 732 were invited to attend before being rebooked. Evan didn't want to go, but someone gently guided him forward. When he stepped onto the small platform, The room went quiet. The director spoke first. "Today, we were reminded that safety is not about rank or age," he said. "It is about courage and attention." He turned to Evan. "This young man broke the rules, and in doing so, he upheld the reason those rules exist." The director gestured to the crowd. "Because of him, you are all here tonight." For a moment, nothing happened. Then one person began to clap. Then another. Then hundreds. The sound grew until it filled the hall like thunder. Evan's eyes burned. He looked out at the faces, parents holding children, elderly couples gripping hands, strangers who would never know how close they came to disappearing. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. "My daughter is on that plane," she said, voice shaking. "Thank you for letting her come home." Others followed. A businessman removed his watch and pressed it into Evan's hand. "For luck," he said. A little boy saluted him. Later that night, Evan sat alone on the runway's edge, watching the lights blink against the dark sky. He thought about how easily everything could have gone wrong, how close silence had come to winning. The next morning, headlines spread across the world. 19-year-old mechanic stops doomed jet, saves 418 lives. Offers came in, interviews, awards, but Evan returned to the hangar. Same oil-stained floor, same tools, same listening, because planes still needed voices, and someone had to hear them. Sometimes heroes don't wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear gloves and stand on the ground, making sure everyone else gets to fly.